And welcome back in, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast. Fridays with Phillip here on the Auburn Undercover Podcast. We appreciate everybody for tuning in once again. If you're joining us live on all of our social media channels on YouTube and Facebook and all of that, coming over from the message board, welcome. Happy Friday to you guys. We are back after taking the holiday last week, and we're going to turn the page here pretty soon to talking season. It's obviously been talking season all off season, but Phillip, it feels good to have media days around the corner just because it gives you something a little more concrete. And I think everybody takes that time to officially flip the page to next season and say, all right, let's stop talking off season a little bit. Let's start talking the actual football season. So a lot of people have kind of different thoughts on media days. It's always been something I've enjoyed, but I've enjoyed my conversations with you as well over the years about just how much this thing has changed. I mean, even in the time I've covered the team, media days has certainly changed a lot.
Yeah, of course. My first, you can't call it media days, was the old skywriters. And I doubt if either one of y'all was tough enough to have survived a skywriters tour. But
before we get started, Phillip, explain to the younger audience, younger than me and you, explain what skywriters is and how it came about. And
yeah, okay. Well, it actually started in the mid '60s, and the first year I went was 1977. But the skywriters was, we got on a conveyor propeller airplane, and it was 40 something people, and we went to every SEC school a couple times during the week. It usually lasted 9 days. A couple of times during that time, during every year, they'd go to like 2 schools in a day. But it was a grind, and of course, every school where you spent the night, put the dog on, and had a big banquet, and had a hospitality room, and there were a lot of people that were in a lot of pain getting on that airplane in the mornings, and I'll tell you about that plane. It was not air conditioned until you got in the air. So we talk about August now, and it's been sitting out there in the hot sun all day, all morning, and then you got all of these people getting on there to weren't feeling all that good. it was a challenge, but it was also fun. I've still got a lot of good friends I made on that, doing that. But it was basically you'd go to school, and either you'd have a luncheon or whatever, and then the coach would talk, and then they would make players available, basically anybody you wanted, and you just went on down through it, and of course it was, like I said, 40 something people, and some of them were TV guys, but most of them were just sports writers who covered the SEC and or SEC teams, and it was because the coaches would hang out and talk, just visit with us. Like at night, they'd come to the hospitality room, and we'd just sit there and talk. And it was really to me, it was much more valuable than media days has been. But I mean, it was literally really challenging at times too, because one year, it was right after Kentucky had gotten in trouble, and there had been accusations of fixing games, and Roy Exum, who was then at the Chattanooga News Free Press, and was kind of the comedian. Fran Kersey gets up to talk, and Roy stands up and says, because Kentucky had been catching it, all criminals and all this stuff. And he got up and he said, Fran, before you start, I got something I'd like to read you. And he said, okay. He said, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. And Fran was not even a little bit amused, as you might imagine. But I mean, we had if you were a rookie, it was a tough life. You had to load the airplane, and I'll tell this story about it now. David Lamb, who recently passed away, and who was a friend of mine, was a rookie, and he said, "By God, he wasn't doing it." And so he got his bags and put them on the plane, and then he got on the plane while the rest of the rookies were out there toiling away. And as we took off, kind of got above the runway, all of a sudden he lets out a scream because his bags are still on the tarmac. and we had to do a rookie show every year. But there was Jack Harston, who was a Hall of Famer in Florida, sports writer, many years the sports editor of the Gainesville Sun, took over the PA system once we were in there. And he would save newspaper clippings from the year before about air crashes.
Oh God!
And then he'd start reading those stories over the PA system. And we had some guys that weren't real comfortable about flying on that plane anyway. And there was one guy who was from the Atlanta paper that said after about 2 stops, he said, "I can't handle this." Then he left. But it was fun. It was hard. It was even hard for the people who didn't who actually like went to bed early and didn't partake. But
You didn't partake, did you, Phillip?
What? Of course
You didn't
not.
partake, did you?
Absolutely not. Right.
A long time ago, yes, I did. And
Sounds like y'all had a bunch of hazing going on.
oh, there was for sure. There was a group that was called the High Tribunal, which ran everything. It was Jack and Ben Bird from the Knoxville paper and Bill Lumpkin, older guys, and they were in full command. They told you to do something, you better do it. And the old airport in Oxford, a real small airport with a real short runway. And when you get there and you see the pilot stepping off the runway to see if it's long enough, that makes you a little nervous. And then when you hear branches scraping on the bottom of the plane as you take off, that makes you a little nervous too. but it was one year speaking of partaking, in the later years, it became probably about half and half. There was more bus trips, like we went to Tuscaloosa, in this particular year, we went to Starkville, and then we went to Tuscaloosa on the bus from Starkville. Well, there was a bunch of guys that were drinking some strange mixture, and we got to the hotel. The bus got to the hotel, and there was the swimming pool had signs all around it, closed, do not swim, and all you had to do was look at it and see why, because it was like slime all over the water. It looked horrible. Well, those guys who had been partaking, they start roaring off that bus and diving into that pool with their clothes on. It was it was different. But like I said, y'all wouldn't be able to handle it. It took a tough guy to handle it. But it was really it was good to the setup was really good. But obviously, as time went on and it became it got bigger and bigger. College football, SEC football got bigger and bigger. It didn't make sense to have 40 something people on the plane. They wanted to have more. The first year they had the skywriters, and then they had that. But you probably won't believe this the way things are now. There was like 4 people that worked in the SEC office. The publicist was a guy named Scoop Hudgens that was about 5 feet tall, and he was, of course, he was the SEC guy on the skywriters, and he called a lot of heck, but one year somebody had charged a bunch of alcoholic beverages to their room, and so charged it had gotten it in their room and signed Scoop's name in his room. Well, Scoop comes on the bus next day, and he said, "If whoever did it doesn't step forward, we're not leaving." Nobody ever did, and we finally left. But it was like I said, I made a lot of good friends on that trip, and it was fun. I sure as heck wouldn't want to try to do it today, however.
How long did it last?
The last year was 1983, and it was literally maybe even more bus than flying, and then after that they shut it down because, for one, it was getting a lot more expensive. That made people, not as likely to go because it cost a lot more. And another thing is, like I said, the whole media days thing had come about, and that's where we are now.
Talk a little bit about how media days has changed over the years, because it certainly has in my lifetime. And
oh yeah, well, in the early days of media days, it was people who covered the SEC again. I mean, it was more than 40 something, obviously, but it was an SEC event for people who covered the SEC. There was no national. Occasionally, there might be a national guy there. Of course, really, then there weren't national sports writers, so to speak. They were more just guys that worked for big papers. But and it was the actual setup of coach at the podium and players. That's not unsimilar. What is unsimilar is that, again, the hospitality was different. They had a hospitality room, and a lot of times, not every coach just came and went like they do now, because I guess not everybody had the airplane to do it. And it was a lot of coaches came and hung out in the hospitality room too. John Majors being the leader of the pack.
I'm shocked.
And we sometimes we would, after everything was done, we'd sit up there and play poker, sometimes real late. And Kay Brewer, who was the wife of former Ole Miss coach Billy Brewer, was a poker playing fool. And she would say, as long as anybody else would stay. And, it was, in 1990, I guess it was, I went on my own tour when I was in Montgomery, and I didn't go to Alabama Auburn on this thing, but I started off in Gainesville. I went from Montgomery to Gainesville, and then I went to Athens. I hope I get this all right. Then I went to Knoxville, then I went from Athens through to Tennessee. And then I went to Lexington and then to Nashville. I probably got that crossed up. And anyway, I did it myself, and it was hot. And I'll tell y'all a little story. I was headed from Gainesville to Athens, and I was like on the north. I'd gone through Decatur, Georgia, Atlanta on I-85, and all of a sudden there, bloop, bloop, bloop. Well, I got a flat tire. Well, I pull off, and I have to pull. There's a service station up there, but I had to pull off and they go up a hill to get to it, and they didn't have anything to help me anyway. So now I've got to change that tire, and so I'm getting down. I'm sitting right at the top of a big old hill, ravine almost, and I get the tire off the car, and I'm totally ticked off, and it's like 100 degrees. And so I take that tire and I just throw it down. Well, it takes one bounce and sets up on its side, and it is gone down that hill. And I had no choice but to climb down there and get it. But it was that was good because I had a lot of one-on-one stuff, obviously, but it was just me. But Phil Snow, who you're familiar with Phil Snow, he used to do that, but they had a plane, so that was better. I didn't have a plane, but media days now it's become really it's a made for SEC TV extravaganza is really what it is, and all these national people are there, and it's just not as cozy as it used to be. But I can see why they that's good for the SEC, but it's not near as much fun. And it's all about memories of media days. I think the year Tim Tebow's senior year, the coaches all SEC thing, somebody didn't vote for Tebow. Well, the Florida guys, or some from Florida, were literally offended. And they asked every single coach that got up there, who did you vote for at quarterback? And turns out that Steve Spurrier, who was at South Carolina, turned it over to one of his PR guys, or maybe it was some assistant anyway. And he was the one that didn't vote for Tebow. But, there's always there's a lot of times coaches say enjoyable things. Some are better than others. Spurrier was awesome at media days. I mean, he was probably the best, and because he didn't pull many punches. But there's always a few stupid questions here and there that don't make any sense, and there probably won't be as many of those this year because a lot of them come from like small radio stations in Alabama and stuff like that, guys that don't really cover it and asking kind of bizarre questions. But one year I got there and I went in and remember Woody Woodenhofer, Ronnie?
Absolutely.
I was walking through the lobby and he was sitting in there in the bar by himself. And I just went in there and sat down, and we probably talked for an hour, and because he was up the next day, and he was a piece of work now.
That's what I've heard. I didn't know him, but I've heard he was.
Yeah, it's I like I said, now the print part of this, unless you're, of course, we're not really print either, but if you're not a national guy. it's harder to get access. I'll just put it that way.
You know, my
What
most
do you
vivid.
think about media days? Like,
Yeah, I mean, my first time was ahead of my junior year of high school, or excuse me, high school of college. No, never mind. I went before my sophomore year. I went before the 2017 season, with the Plainsmen. I was the only person. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know why a sophomore was the only person who wanted to go to Birmingham for media days. Um, but I went and I thought it was awesome. It was like Daniel Carlson and Braden. I thought Braden Smith was giant. I stood next to him at one point. Trey Matthews. Those were Auburn's three guys. I've always sort of enjoyed it. Last year I went for all 4 days for the first time, and I really enjoyed that. I obviously won't do that in Dallas because we're not going to Dallas. But I think if it comes back to Birmingham, Atlanta, Nashville kind of area, I think I'll do that. But I mean it's changed even just in the few years since I started doing it. It's gotten bigger. And I think it's sort of some of the change. You mentioned some of the interesting questions by people. Some of the changes I think have coincided with this boom over the last 4 or 5 years of I mean just more blogs, more of a podcast, kind of radio syndications that because the SEC likes to brag about how many people they credential. And so now they credential pretty much everybody. I'm not saying there's a problem with that. And people want to go and do stuff for their site. That's great. But I think that has sort of changed things. Because I just think the questions are even different now because you're getting them from all angles of people as opposed to maybe people who are like, hey, I'm there to just report on my team and that's it.
yeah, in the past, if you wanted to talk like to a coach after he was done, most of them they'd stop and talk to you, sit down and talk to you, or whatever. It was more laid back than same thing with players. It's more laid back than it is now for sure. And of course, like I said, the SEC network is the driving force behind it. And but players usually are pretty good because they usually feel like it's an honor to be there. My personal opinion, I've written this too, is I think taking it to Dallas, I don't like that. You moved about as far away as you could away from the real footprint of the people who cover your conference. But much like everything else, just like I mean, we don't have as much access at Auburn or most any other place now that we used to either, because the SEC's got the SEC network. Every school's got their own websites and social media stuff and all that stuff. I don't think they think that they need us all that bad.
It's certainly a different world. My most memorable media days was probably right before we started Auburn Undercover, and I had been to a number of them, but you remember our former investor Jamie Sablich.
Yeah,
I took Jamie around and introduced him to different media personalities, and I remember we were trying to wrap the deal up. If you remember, we had the rights to 6 of those ESPN affiliate sites, and so funny story. Nick Saban actually helped push Jamie over the edge. Went in there and met with, introduced him to Saban, and Coach Saban was. Remember sitting there with him, and he's like, "Now listen," he said, because I had been a graduate assistant for him at LSU. For those who don't know, and remember sitting in there, and he said, he had been at Alabama, I think maybe a year, not very long, and he said, and we had an Alabama site, and that ended up going into, fading away with 24/7 when it was founded. But anyway, he said, "How can I know I can trust you?" And I said, "Well, you've known me a little bit, And he said, "If I could trust you, then I'll play ball with you." And so I said, "Well, whatever you give us, I won't give anybody at Auburn, but whatever Auburn gives us, then I'm not going to give you either." And he said, "Well, that's fair enough." So from then on, he was certainly helpful in in convincing Jamie to come on board. But Mr. Sablitz really enjoyed himself. He went around and met Saban and Tuberville and Feinbaum and all these other
So he
guys.
was there. I don't know what year it was when, if you recall, I took him upstairs to Tuberville's room to 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 meet him and talk to him, and it was
Mhm.
which was nice of Tommy to do, obviously, because
Mhm.
he didn't know him, and but yeah, Jamie's a good guy, and he this he's no longer part of it, obviously, but we wouldn't be where we are today if it hadn't been for him, I don't guess.
No, there's no question about that. He and I wore him out. He was in the middle of building a restaurant, finishing up a restaurant on the coast, and I wore him out. He's like, "Well, let me get through this restaurant build," and I stayed on top of him and eventually wore him down. So here we are, 16 years later. But it's been an interesting ride. Phillip, talk about how valuable is media attention from national media nowadays. As we talked about before, I mean, a handful of programs tend to get most of it, but
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with teams that are like Alabama the last 15 years or whoever, Ohio State. I don't have a problem with them getting a lot of attention. But what bothers me is then there's some of those schools plus others like Texas that they get all this attention even when they're not any good. And as soon as they have a good year, then they're right back there again. And not, it is not by accident that Nick Saban went on ESPN every chance he got when he was coaching in Alabama. I think is definitely valuable, that's kind of where fairness, if you want to put it that way, and business kind of collide because uh, ESPN, or I'm sure it's the same way with Fox, the two main college football places, uh, are in it to make money. And if they don't think you can, if you're not a school they think can help them do that, then you're not going to get much attention. And but the thing that, like I said, the thing that bothers me the most is that not the teams that are really good get attention. It's the teams that they have uh, they have chosen as, and I hate the word blue bloods. I completely hate it. I think it's ridiculous and it's made up and it's what's a blue blood is like somebody's not somebody else. So, but uh, but is that they keep on getting attention over and above somebody who is who is really good on a given year. And let me be clear here. I'm not really talking about Auburn because when Auburn's good, they get plenty of attention. Uh, but what they don't have, I said I'm not talking about Auburn. I guess I am. But what they don't get is the kind of attention those other schools get when they're not good. Whether Alabama's good or not, they're going to get a lot of attention. And whether Texas is good or not, they're going to get a lot. Ohio State, Michigan. It's like, Michigan wins the national championship last year, and it's like the world has forgotten that they lost 14 out of 15 to Ohio State.
mhm.
That'd be pretty tough to survive if you were the Auburn coach and you lost 14 out of 15 to Alabama now.
It'd be very
And
difficult. On the same thing on the other side of the state.
yeah, exactly. But that's the part that bothers me. But there's no question, kids, athletes, high school kids, they watch ESPN all the time, and if you watch it, then you come away thinking, well, if you're really good, you go to Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or one or two other places. And I think that's unfortunate.
Well, I think, I mean, and Georgia is a great program, and they've been good for a number of years now. But I remember when they weren't, um,
Oh yeah,
pretty average. So
yeah.
it's
They were average. Really, I mean, they were good when Rick was there, and I thought they were really good for a lot of time. They won 10 games most years. That's pretty dang good.
mhm.
But they weren't always good. And even Kirby's first year, they weren't very good at all. And that Auburn managed to lose to them that year was it's kind of sad. But I mean, they almost lost to Nickel State that year. Georgia did, and they did lose to Vanderbilt. But anyway, that's my main thing. I think attention definitely on the big stage, media attention like you get from ESPN or whoever, I think is very valuable. Uh, and it's fine to me when people have earned it. It's not fine to me when they earned it 10 years ago when they aren't very good now.
In that same vein, and we didn't have this down to talk about, but I'm interested in your thoughts. Does the NIL era, assuming everybody's got the same amount to spend, does it level the playing field for programs like?
I don't think so.
I guess what I'm
I don't
asking
think
is, is it more difficult for the Mississippi States of the world and the Vanderbilts of the world do they have the same disadvantages they've always had against the Georgias and the Alabamas and the LSUs and the Auburns and Floridas?
I think to a great extent, yes. They, you know, well, one, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to spend $22 million a year paying athletes. For like Mississippi State, it's going to be really hard. But here's the thing: I think a lot of people don't recognize is not nearly all of that $22 million is going to go to football players. That's you got Title IX, you got basketball, you got baseball. I mean, it's. I'm not sure it's going to be the financial windfall for players even that some people think it's going to be. Now, but here's where it's going to get interesting, and here's where I do think it's not a level playing field. None of this stops NIL. None of this stops the car dealer from giving the quarterback $500,000 if he wants to. And I think the traditional powers have more people like that than those others. That's what I think. I don't see it making a big difference in terms of who's good and who's bad, though. But I could be wrong. I hope I am. It would be nice for it to be more competitive top to bottom. Though it's pretty competitive top to bottom now. But
I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Phillip, but while you were talking about, teams coming up like Georgia and being really good and getting a lot of attention, I was kind of thinking, I wonder if nowadays it's saying, social media, like obviously that's kind of basic, but like just more talking period, more sources for people to be discussing any sport, let alone college football. But I think about Colorado, and not to like beat a dead horse there, but Travis Hunter, even before Deion Sanders got there, like Travis Hunter was a guy that regardless of what he did at Jackson State, regardless of where he would have gone, if he had been good or not, people would have followed him because he made such a big decision on signing day. Deion Sanders, obviously, we know already, regardless of how good they weren't good. People are going to continue to follow that. And so I think,
there's no question about that. Let me ask you this. What if Arch Manning was to be a flop?
Yeah, that's another good example.
Because one thing that's happened now is that especially at certain positions, for sure quarterback, there's a lot of assuming going on that if you sign some 5-star quarterback, he's going to be great, and a lot of them don't turn out to be great. But but yeah, I don't think there's any question. Social media has changed so many things, but it's not just. It depends on what you want to call social media. I mean, there's sites like ours. I mean, there's three full-blown websites covering Auburn. And then the people on Twitter, people on wherever, it's very different. But I think certainly that has allowed players to get more individual attention and limited the ability of coaches to keep them from getting attention if they want to do that. Because I mean, there's nothing they can do if he says, "Yeah, I'm talking to Nathan because he gave me $10,000." There's really nothing they can do about it. They can't say, "No, you can't talk to Nathan."
Yeah, and I'm interested, Phillip, too, this week, talking about like Texas and Oklahoma, or next week, excuse me, to see how that looks. Obviously, I feel like they're going to be the big subject, but I also feel like it's not completely undeserved, because I do think Texas is an SEC title contender. I just think everything's sort of married up perfectly to where Oklahoma's going to be pretty good. Texas is considered a playoff team, and they move media days to Dallas. Like, there's going to be a lot of talk about those two teams as expected next week.
I agree. I'm not as convinced as you are about Texas. But I mean, a lot of people have been convinced about Texas a lot of times in the last 15 years and usually hadn't worked out. Now, to be honest with you, I've looked a little closer at Oklahoma lately. They got a chance to be really good, and they have dominated Texas.
Yep.
One of the most absurd comments I've heard is Chris Del Conte, the Texas AD, saying, "We're everybody's Super Bowl, and it'll be the same way in the SEC."
I doubt that.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear something like that, I think you really don't get it.
No, LSU's got about 5 other Super Bowls on their schedule then.
Yeah, you think Alabama would rather beat Texas or Auburn?
Right,
or vice
exactly.
versa.
Who do you think Georgia would rather beat? I mean,
Yeah.
who do you think Tennessee and Florida would rather beat?
Florida. Georgia would rather beat Florida. Yeah.
I mean, it's to me, it's kind of a ridiculous comment. It speaks to the arrogance of the University of Texas in general. And
Well, they got it now.
and I had never experienced it firsthand until Charlie Strong was a good friend, and when he was the coach out there, I heard plenty of stories and went out there to visit and toured the facility and stadium and all that stuff. And look at it, it's a great job. At the same point in time, it is, I kind of got my fill of it pretty quickly. So it's,
yeah. I mean, they got so much money. I talked to Will Muschamp a few months, whatever, after he left Auburn to go to Texas. And I said, "What's it like out there?" And he said, "Do you know how much influence Bobby Louder has?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, there's about 100 Bobby Louders here. But the problem is all those Bobby Louders want to get their hand in want to have influence and want to have something to say." And I think it's really caused a lot of trouble for Texas in the last 15 years or so. But Texas, I bet you didn't even know this. In the last 10 seasons, Texas has had losing records 4 times.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think since Mac Brown left, it's like they had one other double-digit win season besides last year during that span.
Yeah,
they won 10 games. I think under Herman, they won 10 games once, and then last year, and that's it.
But and that's I don't begrudge Georgia any of the attention they get. They've earned it, and they're still good. But
And they're going to be really good.
A little bit more. What's the favorite word these days? Proof of concept. It ought to take more than 1 year. And look, I think Texas is going to be good, and they may be great, and they may win the SEC championship. But I'll be surprised if they do.
Yeah, the Oklahoma thing, doing some research on them, Phillip, was like, it's the old question of you bring back almost everyone on defense, but your defense wasn't that good. So what is that a good thing? I'll be interested to see I'll be interested to see kind of how that plays out, because I mean they have a ton of experience. They might have the SEC's best linebacker, but the defense was they were just so. So we'll see. Sorry, Ronnie, I kind of stepped in front of you there.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I forgot what I was going to say, but Phillip, has the SEC, with the addition of these two programs, gotten too good for its own good?
I think, and I don't know how many other people would agree with me, but I think that's a definite possibility. Now, here's the thing. How long is it going to take the fans to adjust? Because the SEC is going to have the best chance to have the most teams in the playoff every year because they've got a lot of good teams. But how long is it going to take fans to understand that they're wasting their time getting mad every time their team loses a game? Because there's not going to be many undefeated teams. I think they're going to have to kind of change how they view it to more like NFL fans view their teams. You want to be good enough to get there. And of course, it's going to be a lot harder to get in the playoff with 12 teams than it is to get in the NFL playoffs numbers wise. But I think you risk doing that because somebody's got to finish last. And it's you got Auburn, Alabama, LSU have all won national championships this decade. And Florida twice, never mind. Not this decade, this century. And then you got Tennessee, and then you got Texas A&M, and those teams have all the resources and all that stuff to do it. And now you add Oklahoma and Texas to that. That's a lot of teams. And a lot of good teams. Now, what does that do? The real question to me is, and by the way, as I said, I'm not sold on Texas. I'm not sold on Ole Miss either. But Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, they're gonna have a hard time keeping up. Now, Missouri seems to be moving toward in the direction of those others, but they got a state law that just says they can do anything they want to, which is one of the real bizarre things about this whole NIL time. So, but you got a whole lot of good teams, and that's a good thing to an extent. It's not such a good thing if because you start beating each other up, and I don't have any doubt that's what's going to happen to everybody. And now, obviously schedules aren't equal, but the SEC has really gone out of their way to kind of take care of Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, Georgia goes to Texas, Alabama goes to Oklahoma, so they both get a home game against the presently two most prominent programs in the league. And then it's according to what the commissioner said, and I assume it's true. I haven't counted it up, but 7 teams play Texas and 7 teams play Oklahoma. Well, I don't believe any other. There has been such an effort with any other expansion teams. But it'll be fun. I mean, playing Oklahoma and Texas will be fun. That'll be. I mean, Auburn will be Oklahoma's first SEC road game.
It's interesting to me, and I guess I'm more of a traditionalist. I'm still getting used to South Carolina and Arkansas. Never mind Missouri and A&M. And I guess, and again, those four programs are not necessarily Texas, and A&M has more tradition than the other 3, I guess. But outside of the Big Six, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, I mean, and nobody else has won an SEC championship in what, at least 50 years, right?
1963, Ole Miss in 1963. Kentucky shared it in 76 with Georgia. Kentucky was on probation and couldn't go to a bowl game, but it was still, at that time, it was still considered an SEC championship. And other than that, it's been those 6 teams for going on 60 years.
And I guess my question is, and I would assume that at some point, Texas, Oklahoma, A&M, I would think. It's going to be interesting to see how long that takes. I also think, and Phillip, you jump in here and let me know if you agree, but I think the days of, Oklahoma in particular, punching 10 and 11 win seasons, before the season starts, when you have to roll through some of those traditional SEC schools and Texas too. I mean, I just think that when you and no offense to Oklahoma State and Kansas State and those programs and programs like them, but playing in those places is not like playing in Athens or the Swamp or in Jordan-Hare Stadium or Neyland Stadium, or it's just not. And I've been to plenty of those places, and I've been to plenty of SEC stadiums, and there's a difference. And the electricity in the air at some of those night games, and even the mid-afternoon kickoff games. I mean, it's a different world. And I know, circling back to the Texas AD's comments about Texas being everybody's Super Bowl, maybe they will be this year, because everybody will be lining up to beat that ass for them. But
That's the thing. But it's 16 teams is a lot.
Mhm.
I remember when it was 10 teams. That was enough, I thought. But
I do too.
but as we all know, why expansion happens. But and who knows what's down the road. The one thing I am convinced of, this is kind of changing the subject, is that I don't think the SEC is going to have any interest in Florida State or Clemson.
A friend of ours who shall remain nameless sent me a text yesterday, and he had heard that Clemson was having there was a lot of smoke there. And again, I'm not reporting anything, but a lot of smoke there between Clemson and the Big Ten. And I'm just not sure that, I mean, the SEC, at least all the states touch each other.
Right.
And the Big Ten has gotten to the point where what does being a conference even mean? I mean, if you're, how many people are going to be staying up to watch Rutgers and UCLA? Or, I just, to me, it's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'll give the SEC credit for keeping it at least somewhat contiguous, but the whole thing of, I mean, Stanford and Cal are on the extreme Pacific coast, and they're in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and the travel situation that's going to be brutal. I don't care; they can try to minimize it all they want to. It's going to be brutal, and it's really going to be brutal for players in other sports, like basketball plays twice a week, or baseball. I mean, it's of course, I'm sure those teams, all those teams from the West Coast would be happy about playing baseball in the Big Ten, probably because nobody there as much as you could. but it's just a strange time. It just is, and I'm too old to like it. But I still like the game, and I'm looking forward to it getting started and start to learn a little bit more about who these teams are and who players are, and tell some of their stories. And I'm looking forward to it. And summer gets to be kind of hard uh, in July when you've about exhausted everything you think of to do. And
We've got plenty of Willie on the message board for those who are interested.
but it's I saw my first college football game was 1957. Went to Auburn, played Mississippi State at Legion Field, and that's what I hate to even think about. How 43 plus 67 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, it can't be any longer than that yet. So I've been how the game has changed in every way is amazing. I mean, the game on the field is completely different. I mean, the game was basically played in the phone booth in the 50s. And people don't. It wasn't until the 1980s that they allowed offensive linemen to use their hands to pass protect. You have to keep your hands like this. Can you imagine trying to block some of today's edge rushers if you had to keep your hands against your chest? Because the defense didn't have to do that, just the offense.
Pretty rough day.
Yeah.
Hey, Phillip, speaking of, well, he's not, I guess, technically an edge rusher, but what did you think about Keldrick Falk, somebody I know you've had some conversations with who's got a great story? He becomes the first true sophomore in Auburn history to go to media day since it started.
I was surprised to see that first, to be honest with you. But then I started thinking about it, and I couldn't think about another one. And I think that says a lot. Only at Oklahoma State is going to media days considered punishment for getting a DUI.
Goodness
gracious! Somebody needs to put a muzzle on him sometimes. On Gundy.
Not to get too deep into it, but I think irritation is part of the. I think irritation's part of the game. You don't get to that point not being a smart enough person.
Oh, I'm not saying he's not smart. But the bottom line is this: you got maybe the best running back in the country. You're not going to suspend him. And Ronnie, I don't think I've told this story on the podcast. Kevin Steele told me about when he was on the staff at Florida State. This was after he left Baylor, and one of the things, he was kind of in charge of discipline, and they had a player who just would not stay out of trouble, just would not. So he goes to see Coach Bowden and says, "Coach, look, we need to suspend this guy, get his attention." And he was a great player too. So we need to suspend this guy and get his attention. And he said Coach Bowden had on reading glasses, and he said he looked at him over those reading glasses and said, "Kevin, your job is to make sure he's on the bus Friday."
We had a kid at Florida when I worked there, and it was a running back. I'll not say his name on here, but he was a good player. Not a great player, but a good player. And we didn't inherit a lot of depth from Spurrier when we took over. And so we really needed all the players we could get. But anyway, he wouldn't go to class, and he was this, and he was late to practice and late to meetings and on and on. So, and he'd been warned, and he had to run stadiums and all the things that you have to do for punishment, and none of it worked. So we're in staff meeting, and head coach tells the equipment manager, he said, "Clean his locker out. He's done. This is on Monday. Clean his locker out." Everybody assumes the kid's off the team. He started on Saturday. So, you know, it happens. But I think sometimes fans and in general, and maybe the public in general, I think that, coaches, whether you're coaches, trainers, managers, whatever, your job depends on winning games.
Oh yeah.
And
I
so
understand.
you want the best players on the field because they give you the best chance to win. And so, a lot of times it's about managing personalities and it's a you got 85 guys on scholarship, 105 guys on the team. And it's you want the best guys on the field, especially when you don't have that many of them. And if you feel like a guy can help you win and keep your job, then you're probably going to play him. A lot of coaches like making, a couple $1 million a year or more.
Yep. That was I think that we probably all would be surprised at some of the things that have happened that nobody ever knew about. But,
I know
but
I've got some stories.
just think of all the guys. Just think of all the guys that got declared ineligible or kicked off teams because of smoking marijuana, and now it's not illegal anymore.
Well, I will. Coach. I remember when Coach Dye suspended Jeff Berger. That was really a tough. Phillip, you could reiterate. You could tell everybody about that. But if I remember right,
Well, actually, he didn't have any choice. It was about a hunting trip he went on with some booster, and so they somehow it came to be that he missed one game, and
I thought he
they
missed
said,
one play. I thought he missed one
well,
play.
that's what I think he missed a game, but it may have just been that one game. Anyway, yeah, the punishment was from the SEC was he can play, but he can't start. So Reggie Slack went out there and took the first snap, came off the field, and on came Jeff Berger.
That's right. Well, Phillip, before we wrap up, give us your top 5 in the SEC for this year. How does everybody finish?
Georgia, Tennessee. I don't do this. Georgia, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama. No, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, and either Missouri or LSU.
Now, where does Auburn finish?
Right there in the round 5, 6, 7, something like that.
I think Missouri can be really good.
They got a chance to be for sure.
I think they can be really good. They were really good last year.
I was talking to one of their coaches a few days ago, and he really believes they got a chance to be real. He thinks they got a chance to be really good.
Their schedule. Let me pull up their schedule. We did this on the schedule difficulty show the other day. And Christian brought up a good point. He said if Missouri doesn't win 10 games at a minimum, like they might have the SEC's easiest schedule. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, all at home. At Texas A&M, not great. At UMass, which is like at UMass in Amherst. I don't know why that's a thing. Auburn at home. At Alabama. Bye week. Oklahoma at home. South Carolina, Mississippi State on the road. Arkansas at home. At A&M, at Alabama, Oklahoma at home are your 3 toughest ones. And you could win one of those. So, yeah.
And they've got pretty good players. And I think Eli does a really good job getting those guys ready. And they've built some phenomenal facilities and really invested in the program. And it's Missouri's a tough job, but they've done a really, really good job, especially since entering the SEC. I mean, Gary Pinkel did a good job there for a long time. And you got to give Eli Drinkwitz a lot of credit. He's done a great job building that thing.
And I mean,
his last game here in Harson's last year. That's the most. I've never seen a game that couldn't be lost like that one was. I mean,
that's unbelievable.
they first they got the thicker kicker who's an All-American, and he's got to make a 25-yard field goal to win the game, and he misses it. So then they go to overtime, and their running back is literally untouched, one step from the end zone, and he just drops the ball. And Auburn wins because Auburn had kicked the field goal on the first possession of overtime. And he just drops the ball before he steps into the end zone.
Phillip, I don't know if you remember that there's another play. I was looking back at that game the other day. Robbie Ashford threw like a short corner route in overtime, and he underthrew it, and the safety dove for it. Should have been intercepted. Like, and then Missouri would have had the ball, and all they would have had to do is kick a field goal. I mean, that was just. I don't know if Harsin would have gotten fired for losing that one. It kind of felt like it, but
I don't think that.
I
think he probably would have lasted as long as he lasted anyway.
Yeah,
probably.
I agree.
But
did we ever tell you the story, Phillip, about the referee in the press box and piping him in? Did we tell you that? Because I guess you weren't at that game, right? Well, on top of all that, the second half was scoreless, if you remember. Like, I mean, it was just Auburn didn't convert. They went on it on fourth down twice, and second half didn't get. I mean, it's just dreadful football. And the official gets everybody to the middle to discuss overtime, like they always do. And it's piped. His mic is obviously piped in through the stadium, and so therefore we can hear it in the press box. And he says, he brings the players together. He says, "Gentlemen, congratulations on a great game so far." Every person in the press box just bust out laughing. Like every single person. Just about the farthest thing from a great game.
Oh man, it was but most of the Harson's games were great games. So.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even sure that I don't even say his name anymore. I refer to him as Potato on the message board.
There's several times to remember in his time here. But when they were at South Carolina and they got the lead with about 3 minutes left in the half, they got 4th and 1 at their own 25 or 30. And he takes Tank Bigsby out of the game. And so now he's going to fool them by throwing a pass over the top on 4th and 1 in his
like own. A 30-yard pass, too.
Yeah. Guess what? Didn't work.
Well, Phillip, you don't remember him saying that? I mean, he said that he didn't need to worry about recruiting. That in the SEC he was going to outcoach people in this league.
I think that Hugh Freeze wouldn't have any problem believing that he didn't care about recruiting, considering what was here when he arrived.
I'll tell you what.
We got on Zoom after that game, Phillip, and I remember Mark Murphy asked about that play, and he said something about it, and then he said, you know, Tank wasn't on the field, and then he said, might have been a good idea to have him there.
Yeah.
Mark said that, and Harsin goes, "Oh, you think so?" That's good. Mark just didn't care, man. He just said it like it was.
You know, for a guy that I've seen a lot of bad fits over the years, and there have been plenty of them in college football. I'm not sure that I've ever seen a worse. I don't think I've ever seen a worse hire at a place than that. I mean,
he should have known better, honestly. But they should have known better too. If they'd done any vetting at all, they would have discovered that he was not a beloved person in Boise, Idaho,
or anywhere else he worked.
Really, if you look at, say, well, he had this 69-19 record or whatever, but that was worse than the previous 2 or 3 Boise State coaches, because that's the conference team in that conference.
Well, if you look at who has come through there, I mean, you've got Peterson and Dirk Cutter, and,
Dan,
I'm
Dan
trying to remember who
Hawkins.
else. Houston Nutt,
Dan
Hawkins.
And who? What's his name? The guy that first won there. I can't remember his name. But yeah, it's
There's been a bunch of guys that came through there and won a bunch of games. And Harson was not, as you say, Harson was not nearly as successful as I don't think he was as successful as any of those guys.
Yeah. And but that's we probably ought not to get off on too much of a Harson discussion.
we can say
be a
that
long discussion. Yeah.
But, well, Phil, we've enjoyed it.
Always. And y'all have a great week, rest of the week.
You too.
See y'all later.